History is full of strange gaps and unanswered questions, but few are as puzzling as the story of two mighty empires that never truly met. In the ancient world, Rome ruled the West, while Han China dominated the East. Both were vast, powerful, and advanced, yet they remained separated by enormous deserts, tall mountains, and a strong rival empire standing between them. These barriers kept Rome and China apart, limiting contact to rumors and distant trade. For centuries, they never fought each other, never signed treaties, and barely exchanged words. Then a disaster struck Rome that would plant the seed for one of history's most enduring legends. The year was 53 BC, and the Roman Republic was at the height of its ambition. Rome was expanding fast, driven by hunger for land, honor, and power. At the center of Roman politics stood three towering figures who shaped the fate of the Republic. Julius Caesar had earned fame through conquest in Gaul. Pompey the Great had secured Rome's interests in the eastern Mediterranean. The third man, Marcus Licinius Crassus, was richer than any of them, but wealth alone could not satisfy him. He wanted military glory to match his rivals, something money could not buy. Crassus had already crushed the slave rebellion led by Spartacus, but that victory did not place him beside Caesar and Pompey in history's memory. Seeking fame, Crassus set his eyes eastward toward the Parthian Empire. This kingdom stretched across lands that are now part of Iran and Iraq, controlling key routes between east and west. Crassus believed that defeating Parthia would bring him honor and balance the fame held by the other two men. With confidence and ambition, he gathered an enormous force and marched into unfamiliar lands. Crassus commanded 7 Roman legions, nearly 43,000 soldiers, trained for close combat and discipline. Roman legions had crushed enemies across Europe and the Mediterranean. Their strength lay in tight formations, heavy armor, and coordinated movement. Roman soldiers trusted their shields, short swords, and the man beside them. They believed no army could stand against their iron wall. What they did not understand was that Parthia fought wars very differently. The Parthian army was led by a skilled commander named Serena. Unlike Rome's infantry-heavy forces, the Parthians relied almost entirely on cavalry. Their army moved fast and struck from a distance. Light horse archers rode swiftly across the plains, firing arrows with deadly accuracy while barely slowing down. Behind them came heavily armored cavalry known as cataphracts. These riders and their horses were covered in armor, carrying long lances meant to break enemy lines in a single charge. On the open plains near the town of Carrhae, Crassus marched his legions into a deadly trap. The land was flat and dry, offering no protection. The Roman formations moved slowly under the burning sun. Parthian horse archers surrounded them, raining arrows from every direction. The arrows pierced shields and armor, cutting down soldiers who could not strike back. When the Romans tried to advance, the Parthians simply pulled away, staying just out of reach. As Roman ranks weakened and lost order, the armored cavalry charged. The cataphracts smashed into broken formations, killing soldiers with terrifying force. The battle became a slow and brutal collapse. Roman discipline, so effective in close combat, meant little against an enemy that refused to fight on Rome's terms. By nightfall, the once proud Roman army was shattered. Ancient accounts tell us that around 20,000 Roman soldiers died that day. Another 10,000 were captured alive. Crassus himself was killed after a false promise of peace. One story claims molten gold was poured down his throat, a cruel symbol of the greed that drove him east. Whether true or not, his death marked one of Rome's worst humiliations. For Rome, the disaster at Carrhae was unforgettable, yet the fate of the captured soldiers was quietly erased. They vanished from Roman records, never mentioned again. Official history simply moved on, as if those men had ceased to exist. Families back home never learned their fate. The Republic offered no answers. 10,000 trained Roman soldiers had disappeared beyond the eastern horizon, swallowed by lands Rome barely understood. Most Romans assumed the prisoners lived and died as slaves deep within the Parthian Empire. That seemed logical and comforting. But history has a habit of hiding stranger truths. This is where certainty ends and mystery begins. Somewhere beyond Rome's reach, those captured soldiers continued to exist. Their story did not end at Carrhae. It only slipped out of sight, waiting to resurface in a place no Roman could have imagined. After the defeat at Carrhae, the Roman prisoners vanished from the written memory of the Western world. Rome recorded its losses and mourned its dead, but the captured soldiers were quietly forgotten. To the Roman state, they were gone forever, absorbed into distant lands beyond control or concern. Yet history does not always follow the lines drawn by official records. Far from Rome, these men were still alive, carrying their discipline, skills, and shared identity into a future none of them had imagined when they first put on armor. A theory emerged many centuries later that offered an extraordinary explanation for their disappearance. According to this idea, the Parthians did not keep all the Roman prisoners close to home. Instead, they sent many of them eastward, far from the Roman frontier. The Parthian Empire constantly faced pressure from nomadic groups on its eastern borders, fierce horse-riding peoples known to the Chinese as the Xiongnu. These nomads were skilled fighters who raided settled lands and challenged imperial control. It is possible that the Parthians saw value in their Roman captives and chose to use them rather than let them rot in chains. The Roman soldiers were highly trained infantrymen, experts in formation fighting and siege defense. Even after defeat, their discipline remained intact. For the Parthians, such men could serve as mercenaries, guarding distant outposts or reinforcing armies, fighting enemies Rome never knew. If this theory is correct, the prisoners were marched thousands of miles across harsh terrain, moving farther from the Mediterranean with every step. The familiar world of stone cities and paved roads faded behind them, replaced by endless grasslands and wide skies. Life on the Central Asian steppes would have been alien to Roman soldiers. The rhythms of nomadic life centered on horses, movement, and survival in a harsh environment. Roman captives may have traded armor for new gear, but they would not have abandoned their training. Their strength lay in working together, holding formation, and trusting commands. Isolated from their homeland, surrounded by foreign tongues and customs, all they truly had left was each other. For years, perhaps decades, these men slipped completely out of recorded history. No Roman writer followed them. No Parthian chronicler left a clear account. They existed in silence, a lost body of soldiers wandering the edges of the known world. If they served the Xiongnu, they would have stood out as foot soldiers in a culture dominated by mounted warriors. Their tactics would have seemed strange but effective, especially when defending camps or fortified positions. Then, almost 20 years after Carrhae, a curious description appeared in Chinese historical records. These texts belong to the Han Dynasty, one of China's strongest imperial eras. Chinese historians were careful observers, recording military campaigns in remarkable detail. In 36 BC, Han forces launched a campaign against a troublesome Xiongnu leader who had been raiding Chinese border regions. The Han general Chen Tang led an army westward to confront this threat. The campaign culminated in a battle near a fortified settlement in what is now Kazakhstan. As Chinese troops approached the enemy stronghold, they encountered something unfamiliar. Among the Xiongnu defenders was a unit of foreign warriors fighting in a formation the Chinese had never seen before. The records described them forming a tight defensive structure that looked like overlapping fish scales. Shields were locked together, creating a moving wall that resisted arrows and attacks from above. To Chinese observers, this method of fighting was unusual enough to deserve special mention. They had faced many enemies from many lands, yet this formation stood apart. The chroniclers did not know its origin, only that it was strange and effective. Nearly 2,000 years later, this brief description would spark a bold and controversial idea. In the mid-20th century, an Oxford scholar named Homer H. Dubs studied these Chinese texts closely. As an expert in Han history, Dubs was familiar with standard battle descriptions. When he read about the fish scale formation, something caught his attention. To him, it sounded strikingly similar to the Roman testudo, a famous formation where soldiers locked shields to protect themselves from arrows, especially during sieges. Dubs proposed a daring connection. He suggested that the foreign soldiers described by the Chinese were not just mercenaries from nearby regions, but survivors of Crassus's lost legions. According to his theory, Roman prisoners had been moved east, entered service with the Xiongnu, and eventually faced the armies of Han China. If true, this would mean Roman and Chinese soldiers had fought each other directly, something no one had previously imagined. The idea was shocking and thrilling. It connected two distant worlds through a chain of survival, war, and migration. Dubs did not stop with the formation description. He pointed to other details in the Chinese records. The fortress defended by the Xiongnu reportedly had double wooden walls and defensive works that seemed unusually organized. Dubs argued these features resembled Roman military engineering rather than nomadic construction. Together, these clues formed the foundation of his argument. A disciplined formation resembling Roman tactics. Fortifications that seemed more advanced than expected. Foreign soldiers fighting far from their place of origin. To Dubs, these were not random details, but pieces of a forgotten journey stretching across a continent. However, bold ideas invite scrutiny. Many historians questioned whether the evidence truly supported such a dramatic conclusion. They pointed out that shield walls are a natural response to arrow fire and could have been invented independently. Nomadic leaders often hired fighters from many backgrounds, including settled peoples familiar with fortifications. The Chinese descriptions, while intriguing, were brief and open to interpretation. Still, Dubs' theory captured imaginations. It transformed a military disaster into a tale of endurance and adaptation. Whether true or not, the story suggested that the lost soldiers of Rome did not simply vanish. Instead, they may have continued marching east, carrying their methods and memories into lands that lay far beyond the limits of Roman maps. According to the theory, the story did not end with a Han victory over the Xiongnu leader. Instead, it took another unexpected turn that carried the wandering soldiers even farther from their origin. The Han army, having defeated its enemy, faced a choice about what to do with the captured fighters who had defended the fortress so stubbornly. These foreign warriors had fought with discipline and coordination unfamiliar to Chinese troops. Rather than executing them, the Han commanders may have seen an opportunity to use their skills. The idea suggests that these men were taken prisoner once again, not by Parthians or nomads this time, but by the Chinese state itself. The Han dynasty often relocated defeated peoples to serve as frontier guards or military settlers. It was a common practice meant to strengthen borders and reduce the chance of rebellion. Under this system, the captured warriors would be moved eastward and given land in exchange for service to the emperor. The proposed destination for these men was a remote frontier area in what is now Gansu province. This region lay along the edge of the Gobi Desert and served as a gateway between China and Central Asia. It was harsh land, but strategically important. Here, according to the theory, a military settlement was established and given a curious name recorded in Chinese sources as Liqian or Legion. This name would become one of the most debated elements of the entire story. In ancient Chinese texts, Liqian was sometimes used to describe distant western lands. Some scholars connected the term with regions near the eastern Mediterranean, including areas influenced by Hellenistic culture after Alexander the Great. A few went further, suggesting that the word sounded faintly similar to legion, the basic unit of the Roman army. While this linguistic link was far from certain, it added another layer of mystery to the narrative. If the theory were true, these former Roman soldiers would have settled in Liqian, married local women, and raised families. Over generations, their language, customs, and identity would slowly fade. Latin would give way to Chinese dialects. Roman armor would rust away, replaced by local clothing. The memory of distant Rome would survive only as fragments, perhaps distorted into legend. What remained would be bloodlines mixed into the broader population of the frontier. For decades, this idea existed mostly within academic circles. It was debated quietly in journals and classrooms, intriguing but unproven. Then, late in the 20th century, the story escaped the boundaries of scholarship and captured the public imagination. Journalists, filmmakers, and researchers traveled to the small villages believed to stand on the site of ancient Lichian. What they found seemed to breathe life into the legend. Visitors reported that some villagers looked different from their neighbors. In a region where most people shared typical Han Chinese features, a few individuals had lighter hair, deeper set eyes, or higher nose bridges. In rare cases, there were even reports of blue or green eyes. Photographs circulated widely, and headlines asked whether these villagers were descendants of Roman legionaries lost nearly 2,000 years earlier. The villagers themselves became part of the story. Many embraced the idea of Roman ancestry with pride. It offered a unique identity and drew attention to an otherwise quiet rural area. One man in particular, named Lu Ing, was often highlighted in the media. His facial features were presented as living evidence of a connection to ancient Rome. The past no longer seemed distant or abstract. It looked back through human faces. Local authorities recognized the power of the story. Roman-themed statues were built. Tourism campaigns followed. Visitors came to see what was described as China's Roman village. The legend had become a cultural and economic asset. But fascination alone could not answer the central question. To know whether the story was true, scholars needed evidence that went beyond appearances and names. Two scientific approaches offered the best hope for clarity. Archaeology could reveal material traces left behind by Roman settlers. Genetics could test whether the villagers carried ancestry linked to Italy or the Western Mediterranean. Together, these fields promised answers grounded in physical proof rather than speculation. Archaeologists began careful excavations around the area associated with Lichian. If Roman soldiers had settled there, they would likely have left behind objects from their culture. Roman coins, weapons, pottery, tools, or burial practices would stand out clearly from local traditions. Even a single confirmed Roman artifact would have been a breakthrough. Years of digging followed. Researchers examined burial sites, foundations, and surrounding land. They documented what they found with precision. Yet the results were disappointing for supporters of the theory. No Roman coin surfaced. No unmistakable Roman weapons appeared. No structures matched Roman building techniques. The ground yielded many historical layers, but none pointed directly to Rome. Next came genetic testing. In the early 21st century, scientists collected DNA samples from male villagers who claimed Roman descent. By studying the Y chromosome, which passes from father to son, researchers could trace ancient paternal lineages. They searched for genetic markers commonly found in populations from Italy and surrounding regions. The results were clear and difficult to dispute. The villagers showed no strong genetic connection to Italian or Roman-era populations. Most of their ancestry closely matched that of neighboring Han Chinese groups. Some genetic elements pointed to Central and Western Eurasian origins, but these were consistent with centuries of migration and mixing along the Silk Road. They did not require a Roman explanation. These findings dealt a serious blow to the lost legion theory. The physical evidence simply did not support it. The European-looking features that had sparked excitement could be explained by the long history of cultural exchange in the region. For thousands of years, merchants, soldiers, and travelers from many lands had passed through the Hushi corridor. Diversity was not unusual there. As the scientific picture became clear, most historians returned to a more cautious view. The theory of Roman legionaries settling in China was seen as imaginative but unsupported. The fish scale formation described in Chinese records could have developed independently. The place name Lichian likely referred to distant western regions in general, not specifically to Roman soldiers. The legend, however, did not fade easily. It had grown beyond evidence into a powerful story about survival, connection, and the meeting of worlds. Even as science challenged its claims, the tale continued to capture attention, balancing on the thin line between history and myth. With archaeology and genetics offering little support, most scholars gradually stepped back from the idea of Roman soldiers settling in China. The evidence simply did not align with the romantic picture that had captured public imagination. Yet the collapse of the theory did not erase the fascination surrounding it. Instead, it shifted the focus toward a deeper understanding of how legends are born and why certain stories endure even when proof is lacking. Many historians argue that from the very beginning, the Lost Legion theory rested on fragile foundations. The key detail, the fish scale formation described in Chinese records, was intriguing but not definitive. Defensive shield formations are a practical response to arrow attacks, and it is entirely possible that different cultures developed similar methods independently. Warfare across Eurasia often followed shared logic, even when societies were separated by vast distances. The proposed linguistic connection between Liqian and the Roman legion also failed to convince most experts. Linguists pointed out that Chinese names for distant Western lands often shifted over time and borrowed sounds from many sources. Liqian may have referred to regions influenced by Greek or Near Eastern cultures rather than Rome itself. To many scholars, the resemblance to the word legion was coincidence rather than evidence. As academic skepticism grew, attention turned to the modern revival of the legend. Critics suggested that economic motivations played a significant role in keeping the story alive. The idea of Roman ancestors offered a powerful narrative for tourism and local pride. Statues, museums, and festivals transformed a quiet frontier village into a destination. In this view, the legend's survival had more to do with modern needs than ancient truth. Still, dismissing the Lost Legion story entirely would miss a larger point. Even if Roman soldiers never settled in China, the two empires were far from isolated strangers. Rome and Han China were the greatest powers of their age, standing at opposite ends of the Eurasian world. Each was aware of the other, even if knowledge came filtered through many intermediaries. To the Chinese, Rome was known as Daqin, often described as a great and civilized empire comparable to their own. Chinese texts spoke of its wealth, advanced cities, and skilled craftsmanship. To the Romans, China was Serica, the distant land that produced silk. This fabric became highly prized among Roman elites, symbolizing luxury and status. The Roman appetite for silk was so intense that moralists complained about it. Writers like Seneca the Younger criticized the transparent garments and the massive flow of Roman silver leaving the empire to pay for Eastern goods. Silk became a symbol of excess, but demand never slowed. Through trade, the two empires were economically connected long before any direct meeting occurred. This exchange took place along the vast network of routes known today as the Silk Road. Caravans carried silk westward and gold eastward, passing through deserts, mountains, and countless hands. Middlemen played a crucial role, especially the Parthian Empire, which controlled much of the land between Rome and China. Parthia profited enormously by taxing trade and had little interest in allowing direct contact between its powerful neighbors. Chinese records describe attempts to reach Daqin by envoy. One account tells of a mission that was discouraged by intermediaries who exaggerated the dangers of the sea journey. Whether through fear or manipulation, direct contact was delayed for generations. The Parthians stood as gatekeepers, shaping what each empire knew about the other. The first claimed direct encounter came much later, in the year 166 AD. Chinese sources report the arrival of an embassy from the ruler of Daqin, identified as Anduin. Most scholars believe this name refers to the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. There's debate over whether this group truly represented the Roman state or whether they were merchants presenting themselves as official envoys. Regardless, the meeting marked a rare moment when the two distant worlds touched directly. By then, the age of Crassus and the disaster at Carrhae was long past. The Lost Legion had faded into memory, leaving only silence and speculation. What remained was a powerful example of how historical gaps invite imagination. Where records end, stories begin. The legend of Roman soldiers in China persists because it speaks to universal themes. It suggests endurance after defeat, survival against impossible odds, and unexpected connections between cultures. It offers a vision of history not as isolated civilizations, but as a web of movement and exchange. Even when evidence falls short, the emotional pull of such a story remains strong. In truth, the catastrophe at Carrie is real and well documented. Thousands of Roman soldiers did vanish from Western records. Chinese chronicles do describe unusual fighters on the empire's frontier. A place called Legionnaires did exist along the Silk Road. These fragments are genuine, but the links between them are uncertain. Science has shown that they do not form a clear chain leading from Rome to China. Yet legends do not require certainty to survive. They live in the space between fact and possibility. The story of the lost Roman legion continues not because it is proven, but because it represents one of history's great what-if questions. What if two ancient superpowers had collided in a remote corner of the world? What if defeat led not to extinction, but to transformation? Ultimately, the tale reminds us that history is shaped not only by what happened, but by what people wish had happened. It reflects our fascination with long journeys, cultural blending, and hidden connections across time. Whether seen as myth or misinterpreted memory, the lost Roman legion of China continues its march through imagination, forever suspended between legend and history.